Thanks for pressing play on this episode of the Forgotten Hockey Players of Broadway, a nostalgic look back at my favorite Rangers from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I'm your host, Tom Browning. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in to a very special bonus episode of the Forgotten Hockey Players of Broadway. I'm your host, Tom Browning. This is a bonus episode, a part two, an addendum, if you will, to the second episode that we did back in September on a very special Ranger, number 19, Jean Ratelle. Hall of Famer Jean Ratelle. Back in that second episode, I had mentioned that on February the 25th, the New York Rangers organization were going to hold a very special evening for Gentleman Jean, and that they did. Last night at Madison Square Garden, in front of the New York Rangers and the Detroit Red Wings, one of the original 6 franchises, the Rangers finally, after probably 25 to 30 years, really too late, they had a very special night for Jean Ratelle in retiring the great number 19 up to the rafters at Madison Square Garden, joining special elite New York Rangers like Harry Howell, Andy Bathgate, Adam Graves, Mark Messier, Eddie Giacomin, Mike Richter, Rod Gilbert, and Brian Leetch. So Jean Ratelle, probably the greatest homegrown center iceman to ever wear the New York Rangers sweater, finally had a very special evening last night, and very special it was. Madison Square Garden, as only they can do it, did a first-class professional job, bringing in some former teammates of Jean Ratelle, bringing in some of the newer class of New York Rangers who have had their numbers retired relatively recently, and it was just a first-class job all around. Some of the highlights of the evening was bringing back the Cat, Jean Ratelle's original coach and GM with the New York Rangers, who did an outstanding job, a very eloquent job, talking about Jean Ratelle's early career, how he was drafted, why he was drafted, his friendship with Rod Gilbert, and the impact he made on the New York Rangers organization, starting from the early 1960s right throughout to the mid-1970s, prior to the big trade with the Boston Bruins. His teammates, Rod Gilbert and Vic Hadfield, 2/3 of the famous gag line, the goal of game line. They were there last night. Both of them gave very, very touching, eloquent speeches. Vic Hadfield talked about just the integrity of Jean Ratelle, the mental and physical fortitude, the quiet confidence, the leadership, the integrity, just the gentleman nature, the respectful nature of how Jean Ratelle played the game. Rod Gilbert talked about how he was a childhood friend, and that's been well documented, how they actually played junior hockey together, how they actually played hockey together during their private school days in a suburb outside of Quebec, and it's just a very special evening all around. And again, we talked about some of the former players that were there, former teammates. You had Brad Park, who really for the life of me should have had his number retired a long, long time ago. And hopefully at a time in the very near future, we will see number 2, the original number 2. Of course, Brian Leetch has his number 2 already retired. Probably the greatest living defenseman in New York Rangers history, Brad Park, who could do it all, will someday have his number retired as well. But Brad Park was there. You had Steve Vickers, who actually played on the gag line after Vic Hadfield was traded to the Pittsburgh Penguins after the 74-75 season. You had Pete Stemkowski, Bob Nevin, Bobby Plager, Rod Gilbert, Rod Sealing, Gilles Villemure, and Teddy Irvin. Just a small sampling of the impactful players that Jean Ratelle played with back in the late 60s, early 70s, where the Rangers made their mark as a National Hockey League powerhouse. Some call the New York Rangers the greatest hockey team never to win a Stanley Cup. They had their opportunities, they had their chances, but Jean Ratelle, Rod Gilbert, and Vic Hadfield, Brad Park, they really formed the foundation of an elite National Hockey League franchise, a dominating franchise, again, back in the late 60s, early 70s. And it was just great to see Jean Ratelle. He looked fantastic. He looked great, very spry. He looked like he can still go out there and play a shift or two. Again, he gave a very eloquent acceptance speech. But not only did he thank the New York Rangers organization, but he also thanked Harry Sinden, the coach and GM of the Boston Bruins, brought him to Boston right after that 74-75 season in the middle of, I guess it was November, during the 75-76 season, that major trade that brought Jean Ratelle and Brad Park to the Bruins for Carol Vadnais, Phil Esposito. He also thanked Harry Sinden for the impact he made on his Hall of Fame career. But it was the New York Rangers where Jean Ratelle got his start. It was the New York Rangers where Jean Ratelle established himself as a National Hockey League superstar. And boy, did he not disappoint. He, along with Gilbert and Vic Hadfield, had one of the most prolific scoring lines in National Hockey League history. Some of the experts, some of the historians have actually said that they are the longest tenured superstar line to ever play in the NHL. They were the most productive line for the longest period of time. Vic Hadfield brought the grit, the toughness, especially early on in his career. Gilbert, again, was the sniper with the hard slap shot. And Jean Ratelle could do it all. Very elegant, very graceful, but physically tough. Who could make the plays, make the shots. He did everything that you wanted a center iceman to do. A great leader. So it was great seeing Vic Hadfield, Emile the Cat Francis, Gilbert, and of course Jean Ratelle give very eloquent speeches last night at Madison Square Garden. Sam Rosen did a heck of a job doing the MC of the program. The only regret I have is that there were so many empty seats at the Garden. I was kind of hoping that New York Ranger fans, as loyal as they've been known to be, would have filled up every seat in that great arena. That wasn't meant to be. But the folks who were there, the folks who watched the ceremonies on MSG, were treated to a very special evening, a very emotional evening. I tell you, looking at Jean Ratelle and his teammates really brought back a lot of memories from when I was a kid back in the mid-'60s, late 60s, early 70s, watching those great Ranger teams. And great they were. And just watching the class, professionalism, and dignity that Jean Ratelle brought to the New York Rangers onto the ice and off the ice each and every night. So, and just wrapping this up, it was a great evening. It was great fun seeing Gilbert and Hadfield together. You can tell they're still very, very close, still cutting up on each other, ribbing each other. It was great to see. You can still tell that they're dearest of friends. And the biggest surprise of the evening, and I'd be remiss in not bringing this up before we close out, the biggest surprise of the evening was when Gilbert and Jean Ratelle quietly went over to Vic Hadfield toward the end of the ceremony and mentioned to Vic Hadfield that he would be next in the long line of very special Ranger players to have his number retired sometime next year. So Vic Hadfield, the great number 11, will be joining Gilbert, Jean Ratelle to close the circle, to close the loop on having all three members of the gag line, the goal of game line. They'll all have their number hoisted to the rafters at Madison Square Garden. And when Ranger fans like myself, who had the chance to cut their teeth becoming diehard Ranger fans back in the early mid-'60s, late 60s, 70s, it'll continue to be a very special occasion when you walk into Madison Square Garden, you look up at the rafters, and you see the number 1 for Eddie Giacomin, number 7, Gilbert, number 19, Jean Ratelle, and next year at some point in time, hopefully again against a original 6 team, the Rangers will hoist another number 11, Vic Hadfield, to the rafters at Madison Square Garden. So again, it was a very special evening, a lot of fun, very emotional. I'm looking forward to doing a profile on Vic Hadfield in the not too distant future. But again, it was a very, very special night at Madison Square Garden, the type of night that only MSG, and it was great to see some of my really forgotten heroes of the New York Rangers support Jean Ratelle this past Sunday night. So that concludes the bonus edition of the Forgotten Hockey Players of Broadway. I'm your host, Tom Browning. Thank you for listening. This has been a Go Tommy Boy production.